73, that's our text line, or you could write in cast a write-in vote if you like. It's 801, as I said, and Scott McNamara, the Oneida County DA, still sitting in with us this morning on the Talk of the Town. You could call in and ask a question at 624-0870 or text it along. I gave that number before, 623-0373.
Great conversation so far. We talked about the Rome situation, and yesterday back in court, Paul Bumbolo, the Whitesboro Street incident, which happened almost a year ago?
January 6th, January 7th, yeah.
Yeah, pretty interesting. So if you can give us an update on what happened yesterday.
Yeah, sure. What happened yesterday was he entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. And basically what happened was he admitted to the homicides, and we didn't fight his defense. And what had happened, what has been happening since the homicide was his defense team, or his defense attorney, which was the public defender's office, they had him analyzed to determine whether or not he was suffering at the time of the incident from either some mental disease or defect that made it so that he didn't understand the nature and consequences of his actions at the time the crime was committed. And initially, as everyone remembers, right as the case first started, he was deemed incompetent to stand trial. Then he was sent to a mental health facility where he was given medication and everything, and then he was deemed, so that he could stand trial. What they were trying to determine at that point, and I'm not quite sure if he was malingering or not, because he was somebody, which now the case is over, I can talk about. We had prosecuted him before, so he definitely knew what the prosecutor's role in the situation was. He knew what the defense attorney's role and the judge's role was. We knew that from prior involvement with him.
So an incident other than this?
Other than this. He had broken into his former girlfriend's house and then damaged her new well, not necessarily boyfriend, but the person she was seeing's vehicle. So we knew from that he definitely knew what the prosecutor's role and everything. And
sure.
So when he got arrested on this, he was, I think, but I don't have a lot of proof to it, that he was at least pretending, or maybe he was at that point suffering from his mental illness at that point was preventing it.
I concur with just some conversation, and Samantha was at the court proceedings a few different times, and she had mentioned to me, came back and just said, it's just a different person, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that happened behind the scenes, which I was, once again, you don't know what somebody's thinking, but he clearly recognized me, at least I thought, when he saw me. He was staring me down and stuff like that. So initially I wasn't certain that, that he was suffering from a mental disease or defect. But anyways, the doctors found that he didn't understand, and then he was, went to the hospital, got treatment, and then ultimately they found him competent to stand trial. Sorry. But what then happened is his lawyers, which happens in cases like this, his lawyers then, actually pursued the defense that he was not guilty by reason of the mental disease or defect. So they had their expert analyze him, and they deemed that he was not, that he was suffering at the time from a mental disease that would prevent him from understanding the nature and consequences of his actions. So once we received that report, we then hired somebody to go through the case, also interview him, and then give us a recommendation. And basically what we're looking for is someone that's going to testify for us at trial and, say that he wasn't. I mean, that's, typically what we're trying to do. So we actually hired an expert out of New York City that came highly recommended by the Queens County District Attorney's Office. And myself and Mike Calusa, one of my first assistants, know quite a few people down in Queens.
Is it common to maybe go that far outside of the...
Typically, no, but we were looking for somebody because we knew we had a very unique fact pattern. The crime scene alone, it made everybody feel that we were dealing with something very, bizarre, at least in what he was thinking, because it was by far the most bizarre crime scene I've ever seen.
The nature of it.
Yeah, I mean, just decapitating his sister, and then there was a lot of religious things going on there. It was very, very bizarre. And so we hired a guy from New York City, and he came. He actually reviewed the whole case. And I got to say, a couple of weeks ago, I actually drove down to New York to talk to him because he had issued his report, and I just didn't want to go off the report. I wanted to actually go down, talk to him. So he met myself and 3 of my assistants. We all went down there together. We met with him, and basically, asked him, to support his report, just verbally support it. And I was very impressed with him. So now what we end up having is, we have their expert saying that he's suffering from a mental disease or defect. Now we have our expert saying it. And our expert, is a little bit more conservative. He isn't this person that typically just says that all the time. So, we knew that if we went to trial, just like we did this one other time, we did it with Treblecock, and when our expert came back, and in that case was a little bit different because I felt that the expert we hired didn't do as thorough of a job as I thought he should have. There was a couple people he didn't interview, and I had a problem with that.
And there was also the death of an infant.
Yeah, well, it was the death of a 6-year-old. Right. So, in this case, I wanted to, same thing I did in that case. I wanted to make sure that I was comfortable. And in this case, I will say, the doctor we hired, he knew the case upside down, backwards, inside out. He knew everything. He knew facts that it was very impressive, the amount of facts and the amount of time that he put into it. And, and I was concerned about 2 things. The first one was bath salts. In this case, Bumbolo was naked with no shoes on, 13 degrees out it was that morning. So, once again, that leads to either the person suffering from a serious mental illness, because that is not normal behavior.
And he was a quarter mile or more from his home.
Yeah, it was a ways from his home. So he had traveled, naked in bare feet at that temperature. So we knew we were dealing with either some sort of mental health issue or one of the other things that we typically see that type of behavior is when somebody's high on bath salts. So that was one of our main concerns. And, his blood was checked. He had no signs that he was on bath salts. There were signs that he had ingested marijuana, which he readily admits to. So the marijuana we found in his blood, which was consistent with what he admitted to, but however, no bath salts. There's no indication he was on bath salts. So then the next question that I was concerned about was, and obviously we see it in the movies, the public sees it where the person gets acquitted, then walks by and winks, says, I tricked you all. And what that's typically referred to as malingering or faking. And, that's really what I spent most of the time talking to the doctor about. I said, how do we know he's not faking? And basically, like what he said, what he's suffering from is not something that, everybody can pretend I'm hearing voices, but certain things that he did and what he's suffering from aren't really common to the public, and especially to somebody that's not educated in that field. And so, like he said, he did these things way before, and he was doing them after. So he would have had to been smart enough to fake it before, fake it after, but also to do the crime and stage the crime in the manner he did. And he said, I just don't think that's possible. And he goes to just, when you take and look at this from a big picture, like a videotape of his life and consider everything, not just one little snapshot of a homicide scene, he, as Bumbolo's own psychiatrist came back and said, was suffering from a schizophrenic episode and didn't understand the nature and consequences. So, so that's what we knew we were going to lose on the defense. So instead of, we could just have went to trial and lost and let the jury or the judge make the decision. But then it also cost the county a lot of money. You're talking about experts that get paid a lot of money an hour to come and testify, and so this was what was going to happen afterwards. So we accepted the plea. My ADA that handled it, Stacy Pelosi, she had to write, I think it was about a 45-page document that becomes part of the record, and she had to read it into the record yesterday as why we were doing what we're doing.
Scott, you mentioned the idea of feigning insanity, and you mentioned the popular culture examples of that, from Jack Nicholson's role in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to Edward Norton in that other movie. How often have you seen examples of that in your own life?
Well, unfortunately, since I've been the DA, we've had 3 cases that come to my mind.
Which is why you're very careful about situations
I'm very
like this.
careful.
Yes.
I mean, we had Kevin Adams, who killed his grandfather, and we let him plead guilty, not guilty by reason of insanity, for a lot of bizarre things that he did, and the same situation where our expert came back and said that he was suffering and consistent with their expert. Troublecock, who killed the 6-year-old little girl out, and we actually tried that, and he was found not guilty by reason of insanity after a trial. So we've had a few of these cases. Unfortunately, we've had them raise the defense on a few other cases, which our experts have come back and said no, that's absolutely not true. But it seems to be a defense that's being used a lot more. Which then raises the issue, question, I guess, that is it because the defense has been successful a couple times, or is it because of the way that we deal with people that are mentally ill? Like, when I was young, I mean, there were hospitals where people were mentally ill and they were confined, and even, just on, you had the Utica, the psych center, and
Old Main here,
the
too.
Old Main,
Sure.
and then, and if my memory serves me correctly, when I was younger, I think the Oneida Correctional Facility was a mental hospital too. So people were off the street and confined, where now, because of the way people were being treated in those facilities, we've tried to get those people out of these confined facilities and back into the public, and so we have to deal with, unfortunately, some of the problems that come about with having people that are severely mentally ill in the population.